Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here to continue our teaching and our lesson that we've been doing on the trauma of transition. And we have discovered some things that we probably didn't think about or we didn't know about, or it just might be validating in regards to what happens with some people and some groups when they are encountering transition. And for some, it's very traumatic to move from one state to another. And we're going to look at some of that. And we're going to revisit some of the things we've already talked about. And the hope in this lesson, this part 2, is to delve just a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about some of the things we've already said before, but hopefully to shed new light on the trauma of transition, the trauma of transition. So let's get right into it. Part 2 on the trauma of transition. As part of our recap, we want to look at our initial verse, the verse by which we began to unravel this concept called the trauma of transition. And we're reading from Numbers chapter 11, verses 4 through 6. And specifically out of the New Revised Standard Version, but different versions say different things, but they pretty much say the very similarities that we see here in regards to rabble and strong craving. It says here, the rabble among them had a strong craving, and the Israelites also wept again and said, quote unquote, if only we had meat to eat. We remembered the fish we used to eat in Egypt for nothing. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. So as we can recap from this particular verse, we see that there was a faction among the Israelites, and their influence had spread and had become like a cancer, as it were, that were attacking other members of the Israelites that had came out of Egypt, and thereby indicating that, hey, look, we had it better off when we were there in Egypt. Our diet is used to that which we came out of. And here we are on this bread, as it were, this manna that is nothing like what we had before. And so you can kind of see the ungratefulness that many of them had when they came out of Egypt and into this wilderness. The ungratefulness for having experienced the deliverance that they had. But this rabble, unravels this idea that something was going on deeper beneath the surface. Something that we may not pay attention to, and something we should, especially as it regards to working with people who are transitioning from one dynamic experience to another, or from one old static experience that they've become accustomed to a dynamic experience of one that they have to get used to. The last time we looked at this passage first was in context. As we said before, the children of Israel had just escaped from Egyptian bondage under the leadership of Moses. Now we know what happened, that before Pharaoh released them there from the reins and the control of Egypt, that God himself intervened on their behalf through the miraculous component. We saw all kinds of miracles that occurred. Miracles that attacked the Nile River, miracles that attacked this, and even up to the very end when we see the miracle of preservation and protection of the firstborn of the Israelites because they had the blood over their doorposts. Hence, we got the Passover, and the firstborn of the Egyptians were what? They lost their lives. All of this led up to this crescendo. I've got to let these people out. And we know that Pharaoh was good for that. But at the very last moment, Pharaoh had a change of heart, a change of mind, which I believe in this context was God's way of really, garnering the people's trust in a living God that was going to do one more miracle on their behalf. It was also a way by which the leader was put to the test. And we're going to talk about leadership in the midst of this particular context where you have people transitioning. We're going to talk about leadership and how that and how we can learn from that and how we can navigate through that. We're going to look at some pieces of that here in this part 2, but we're really going to look more about the leadership aspect in the midst of a transitioning people in our part 3. So what we have here is that it was a transition of leaderships. I'll give you that much. Transitioning from the leadership of Pharaoh, the oppressor, and transitioning to the leadership of Moses, the deliverer. And that in itself had two different particular contexts. One they were used to, the other one they had to learn to grow and to adopt that particular way and teachings and leadership that Moses had. The problem that they've encountered was this rabble. And this rabble occurred shortly after deliverance. And they influenced the Israelites to what? Long for and to crave what they were used to or what they had experienced while in bondage. They encouraged them, they pressured them, they began to complain about the food that they had there, and they began to remember and relish the delicacies that they had while living in bondage. We learn that coming out of something does not mean that what we came out of us. I mentioned this the last time. We learn that coming out of something does not mean that what we came out of actually came out of us. This psychosocial spiritual conflict I've coined as the trauma of transition. Well, today we're going to do a deeper dive. That is, we're going to take a closer look at the problem associated with deliverance, whether it be a group of people or an individual that has encountered a physical, emotional, and sometimes even a spiritual liberation from some type of bondage. The question is, why do some things linger on after the initial breakthrough has come for some, yet others may have obtained their freedom and never look back? What we can learn as leaders is on how to handle those who are caught in the trauma of transition. And again, this type of deliverance that you see depicted here is a deliverance of a people, and how that even if a people have been in something or in a particular way for a long period of time, they can become so accustomed to that is the only thing that they know. Or an individual that may have been in a similar context, that they have been accustomed to that thing that they have been conditioned and framed to accept as a normal way of life. that can become problematic when it becomes this tug of war between moving forward or moving backward, between walking by faith or resorting to that which is very easily captured by sight. I can see that, but I can't see this. I remember that, but I'm not ready for this. Some people, they linger in that mode, as it were, where others, they don't look back. Why is that? Why some look back? Why some move forward? In fact, many times, both the whole group have received the same word, have received the same teachings, yet we find that group of people, some move forward and some move back. In fact, I think about the parable of the sower where Jesus began to teach his disciples about the condition of the heart. And sometimes it is the condition of the heart. And I'll say this, all the time is the condition of the heart. And those who receive seed upon the wayside are those who heard it, and yet the fowls of the air came and took those seed, took that which was sown in their heart away from them. In other words, they became distracted, or they began to, they were excited about it, and it just kind of rested on the surface. But it did not take root. And we see that all throughout that parable, that there were those who, because of the word, because of persecution, because of testing, and because of trials and all this, they endured for a while. But after a while, they began to resort back. They began to walk away from. They had no depth into that word that they've heard. And a lot of times that's the case, is that number one, people either forget and get distracted. Number two is that because they started out okay, but then these other lusts enter in, these other cravings that they used to have, these other influences began to well up, and they find themselves beginning to what? Want and venture backwards instead of forwards. Or the persecution that we see. We find that they endure for a while, but then when all hell breaks loose, or when things begin to happen that they hadn't planned on, or if it begins to challenge their particular worldview in a way that's going to cost them more than what they plan on, they step back. But there's always that aspect of people that are like those who receive seed in good ground that were able to produce 30, 60, and 100-fold. And that's the people that got the breakthrough and didn't look back. But there are those who got the initial breakthrough and fell off or fell away or began to linger back because of some influence or because of some taste that they had in their mouth that they haven't yet gotten rid of. We're going to talk about that. So if you want to read that, you can go into the Matthew chapter 13. It talks about the parable of the sower. And you can kind of see that this is the condition of the heart. 4 types of heart that respond to the same kind of word. It's one of the reasons why we find people that are taught the same and preach the same, that they're going to be a different kind of response based upon the conditions of that person's heart and maybe the circumstances that are going on in their life or in that group. Let's read on a little bit further here. One size doesn't fit all. Today as leaders, we learn this truth. And if you are a leader, this is a truth that you should come to know, that one size doesn't fit all. People of faith who lead have certain expectations of those who follow. We expect that what we teach should be adopted and observed by others. And sometimes in doing so, we may get frustrated when we don't see, certain aspects of our congregation or certain aspects of our group not, adherent or slacking off. And that we get frustrated by that. And because, wait a minute, I'm telling you the truth. How come you don't adopt it? There are reasons for that, and we're going to get into that. We expect that what we teach should be adopted and observed by followers. But why do some struggle and others do not, who hear the same word and guess what? And believe the same way. They've heard the same word, they believe the same way, but something deeper is at play here. Sometimes the problem is something deeper. And a deeper problem requires a deeper solution because every person's process is different. In my professional work as a grief counselor, one of the things that I share with those who are in a group setting or those who are in individual counseling, I say to them that everybody's going to grieve differently. And the truth behind that is we're all are going to go through our process of transition differently. So one size doesn't fit all, where certain people may rise to the occasion and do what's right and others may lag behind. We as leaders must have the capacity to either delegate those compassionate leaders that work alongside us to address their concern, or we have to have the kind of compassion that we can model before others, that they can follow our example. Sometimes it's easier to win bees with honey than to try to win them with vinegar. You can't always beat people up and use the Bible to browbeat people across the head because they're not doing the word that you're preaching. Maybe sometimes there's something inside them that needs some adjustment. Maybe they need some time that help them process. Maybe there's some sort of trauma that has made it difficult for them to make this kind of move. We need to figure out what that is, because every person's process is different. Nobody is the same, and one size most certainly does not fit all. Let's look at the Gospel of Luke chapter 5, verses 37 through 39. And maybe the parables of Jesus can shed some light upon the answer or the question that regards the trauma of transition. And beginning in verse 37, it says this: "And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the new wine will burst the skins and will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins, and no one after drinking old wine desires new, but says, 'The old is better.'" Now we know that Jesus was giving a parable, probably relating to the Pharisees and Judaism and coming out from under that old and entering into the new. Could very possibly be that. But the truth behind this parable is very real. Is that when you have new wine, you want to make sure that the wineskins are fresh, so they can handle the expansion and of fermentation. But if that wineskin is already fully extended, the problem is you put new wine in it, it's not going to be able to contain it, it's going to burst. And so those wineskins are made of some sort of an animal skin, and they contract and they expand. And when they're new, they're very pliable. When they have become an old wineskin, they have to be what? They had to be recycled or refurbished. They don't throw that old wineskin away, but they take that old, fully expanded wineskin and they began to refurbish it so that it can contain new wine and go through this whole process again. Jesus points out something here that I think is worth noting. Verse 38 says, but new wine must be put into fresh wineskin. We get that. But 39 says, no one after drinking old wine desires new, but says the old is better. In fact, I really like the King James version of this particular verse. And he said, no one having drunk old wine straightway desires new, for he says the old is better. The old is good, the old is better. Straightway means immediately. So the idea lends on the one hand that they're more predisposed to stick to what they're used to, but it also gives a hint using the word immediately or straightway, which means they may warm up to it later, but absolutely not right now. And this is where we have to be patient as prophets and pastors and teachers or whatever the case it might be, that with people. You can't make folk do what's not in them yet to do. Some people have to be built up to the point that they can make those first steps. Where others may take off running, this person over here and this group over here, I got to spend more time with them. Yes, it might be frustrating, but the truth is I got to spend more time with them because everybody's process is different. Jesus said, no one drinking old wine desires new because they say the old is better. Now, most of us who have read the Gospels are familiar with this parable. Jesus, again, is making a point that new wine must be put into new wineskins in order to be preserved. He further states that when you have consumed old wine, you're just not ready for new wine. And trust me on this, we all are consumers. And we all have consumed something that we become used to. We've all consumed something that we become accustomed to. And so to offer me something different, to offer me something that doesn't taste like what I used to taste, or it doesn't give me the experience that I used to have, or it's not the tradition that I am accustomed to. It's not the way we do it here. It's not the way that we've done it in the past. You're not ready. And we need to respect folk that are not ready. And we need to understand that some of the reasons why they're not ready is because for them transitioning is so traumatic. There's things we can learn about that. So, when we've been a consumer of old wine, we're not warm and fuzzy to the idea of what? Consuming new wine. Even though the truth is that eventually new wine does become old. I'll leave that right there. Dr. Alfred Plummer, a 19th century biblical scholar, said, or 20th century biblical scholar, he came out in the 1800s, but he made this statement about this same passage. And he said, the prejudiced person will not even try the new or admit that it has any merit. He knows that the old is pleasant and suits him, and that is enough. He is not going to change. Oh, no. Check out that fact. He knows he's not going to change. Some folk are just not going to change. It doesn't matter how plausible the truth is. It doesn't matter how you explain it, how you break it down, how you get people excited about it. Some people are going to just say, I was born a Baptist and I'm going to die a Baptist. Now, I'm just picking on that. I'm just using that phrase there. I'm not really picking on Baptist people, but that's a common phrase that we do hear. I was born a Baptist and I'm going to die a Baptist. I'm not going to change. And whether it be another faith experience or not, we have heard that statement. And people make those kinds of statements because why? The old is pleasant and it suits them. And for them, it's enough. Their cup is full of what they have become so accustomed to. And that's suitable. They don't need anything that's going to rock the boat or anything that's going to change. They like things the way they were. And that's exactly what we saw with the children of Israel, with this rabble that rose up. They were basically saying, hey, the old is pleasant. That old that we had back there in Egypt. And it suited us. And for us, that's enough. They were simply not ready to change. The evangelical commentary on the Bible also gives a rendering on verse 39. And it says, however, Jesus recognizes that most people find it difficult to embrace something that is new. They prefer their old, comfortable ways. So even Jesus knew it. This is one of those things that, hey, it's a reality. And for some, it's traumatic to change from something that is so pleasant and so comfortable to something that they don't have a grid for, or they don't have a construct for, or they don't have a rubric for. They have no idea on how to adjust to that. Now, we talked about this the last time, or we've talked about it in other podcasts where we said that COVID-19 really challenged the paradigm of the way we used to do things. How we did this, how we did business, how we did church, etc., etc. And so that paradigm shift caused a whole lot of squawking. A lot of people began to basically voice their opinion on how strong they were against this kind of change, and had good reasons as to why moving in a hybrid state or moving into some sort of virtual approach to worship and the like, hey, that's really taken away from the way we've done things all along. And it's really, they've made reasons as to why that is. Again, the transition COVID-19 has brought and imposed upon the people of faith. You clearly see the trauma of transition that's associated with it. When we think about the passage that we just read there, the one where Jesus talks about, no one having drunk old wine is going to immediately desire new. When you exegete that text, we find clues as to why the struggle is so real. All that Jesus said in that parable was true. And he came right back and said, hey, if people are used to this, they're not going to warm up to anything. He told us to expect some people not to want it, to expect some people not to get it, but also to acknowledge that some people will want it and will get it and will change. The struggle is so real for some. The struggle to get free and to stay free from that which held us hostage in the past. Now here I'm kind of alluding toward Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. And Galatians 5 and 1 said, to stand fast in your liberty where Christ has made you free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So this kind of plays into it. Be not entangled again. The area that Christ has liberated you, stand free in it. And sometimes in order for people to stand free in that liberty, they have to have someone that's patient enough to disciple them right where they are. Most of us, and let's just keep it real, want to just tell people what to do and we expect them to obey it. When you're discipling somebody, it's more than just telling people what to do, but it's explaining what needs to be done, walking with them in their own process, and helping them the best they can to do better than what they've been doing in the past. I'm just saying, it's like that not only in matters pertaining to the faith, it's like that in business, it's like that even in dealing with counseling and other issues where people have certain things that they're still stuck in. They need to have somebody that's able to walk alongside them and help them and be willing to commit to them right where they are. One of the reasons why we don't commit to people right where they are is because we're uncomfortable with their process or how they are going through. We're uncomfortable. We think people ought to get it and boom, move on. But now, to really help people to transition is going to require those who are more mature to help the transitioner. It requires those who are more mature to help the transitioner. The struggle to get free and to stay free from that which has held us hostage in the past. And that's the way it is. There are things that have held all of us hostage in the past. And if we be honest, there's still stuff in the past that has a little hold on us. But if we keep it real, we can get the help that we need for ourselves, and we can also get the help that others need because of our good example or our own way of processing our transition. So we've talked about the old being better. Sometimes the struggle manifests itself in the form of fear. Fear of the unknown. Well, we can look at the children of Israel that were transitioning through the wilderness. It was unknown to them. They saw Pharaoh. They knew what to expect in Egypt. But out here in the wilderness, not only they don't have the food that they're used to, but they also don't have the God that they're used to. Now we're going to talk about this as we go into part 3. They not only had the food that they were used to, but they didn't have the God they were used to. The God that they were used to looked like Egypt, looked like the oppressor. The God that delivered them was very different than the God that held them in bondage. And they had to get used to this God who is invisible when they were used to a God that was visible. Fear of the unknown is one of the reasons, is one of the manifestations of the trauma of transition. And when we're afraid of something, we will oftentimes make excuses not to move forward or to act on a truth that's obvious. Sometimes it's pushback or persecution from others still in the pot who don't want to get out, and they don't want you out either. Now we've heard that analogy told many times where you got all these crabs in the pot and one crab tries to get out and the other crabs try to pull them back down. And that's just the way it is with people. Some people don't want, they're in the pot and they're comfortable there, and they don't want you to get out either. So they do everything they can to what? Discourage you, or to give you some kind of pushback, or what? Persecute you for wanting to make a better life for yourself, or wanting to make this transition that is in your best interest. Sometimes it's the fear of the unknown. Sometimes it's pushback from others. Sometimes the struggle is a cause of a marred psyche. Sometimes the struggle is the cause of a marred psyche. In this case, that is more comfortable with the ways of the oppressor than the newly found ways of the deliverer. But another way of looking at this marked psyche is that you can be in a situation for so long and it does affect you. It affects how you think, it affects your perception, and it affects how you live. And that marked psyche is kind of used to that particular form. You know, Jesus said this, and this is kind of a stretch, so I'm putting it out there as a stretch. But he gave this example that if you cast an unclean spirit out of a person, you know, and it goes through dry lands and it goes back to that same house where it's nice, neat, and swept, and the outcome is 7 times worse. The idea is that when you clean something out, something's got to occupy its place. Sometimes this idea of a marked psyche is that this marked psyche is that aspect of us that's so used to that. And so when you bring a person out of that, you got to work with them. You got to be able to help them and help repair their worldview, help repair their psyche so that they can, you know, they can begin to make baby steps forward and not feel like that, oh, I'm out here now and it's all on me. When a person comes out of something, it's not just on that individual. There's a collaborative effort and a cooperation that's supposed to happen with the community. But if the community is not there on their behalf, it makes the struggle even more real. And the trauma of transition will result in one outcome. If they're struggling with it, they're going to go back. If they have the kind of community that's there to have compassion and comfort and guide them along the way, the chances are for their transition is going to be a lot greater than those that did not have the community there to step in to help them. So this marked psyche is a mindset that's so used to and has been shaped by the struggles or by the dynamic that they've came out of, that they were associated in. When oppression is normalized, behavior, to suggest an alternative lifestyle or paradigm or simply a way of doing things, it is going to result in resistance to change. The knee-jerk response will be, this is all I know, and I'm not ready for anything else. That's the outcome when oppression is normalized. You're going to get that knee-jerk response initially. People will often double down even if they know that what you're saying is true. Oh, they're just going to go in denial. Oh, they're going to give you this pushback. Even if they know that what you're saying is true. They're basically saying by their actions, I'm just not ready yet. Israel's experience in leaving the Egyptian empire reveal how steep the effects of oppression can extend. Just like then, and it is true now, that relieving our addiction to empire requires something similar to cult deprogramming. Well, that's all we're going to talk about today. We're going to deal with part 3 the next time we come together, and hopefully we can look at some leadership aspects. And we want to get into some more concrete examples today where the trauma of transition does occur. I trust that you've been blessed. We look to see you next time here on Talking Points. God bless you.